In the glass towers of downtown Chicago, a brilliant strategist was about to face her biggest professional challenge. What started as a well-deserved promotion took a shocking turn when she came face-to-face with systematic workplace sabotage. Dahlia Myles wasn't your typical corporate climber. For 4 years, she had spent her life juggling night classes and 15-hour workdays, known for her razor-sharp analytics and quiet determination. When she encountered Kendra Bellamy's whisper campaign suggesting she'd slept her way to the top, she had no idea she was walking into a carefully orchestrated character assassination. Dahlia's methodical documentation and strategic patience would lead to consequences that reached far beyond one toxic coworker. What began as office gossip would become institutional transformation. The marketing industry would never be the same after Dahlia automated integrity into the very foundation of corporate culture. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and corporate ambition when Arjun Patel cleared his throat, announced my name, like he was calling a funeral eulogy, instead of a promotion. Dahlia Myles, lead analyst. Effective immediately, he said, scanning the room with those careful eyes that missed nothing, especially not the way Kendra Bellamy's smile froze mid-sip of her green tea. I knew this moment tasted different than I'd imagined sitting through 1,000 night classes while my classmates networked at wine bars. I couldn't afford, but I didn't expect silence. I didn't expect the way Jennifer from accounting suddenly found her phone fascinating, or how Marcus started shuffling papers like they contained state secrets. Congratulations were supposed to happen here. Applause, maybe a few "hey, good for yous" instead. I got the sound of expensive heels clicking against marble, as people filed out without making eye contact. Kendra lingered, of course she always did when she needed to mark territory, sniff out weakness. Her 10 years at Veritas Edge hung around her shoulders like a designer coat, something she wore to remind everyone she'd been here since the company logo was still being focus grouped. She approached with that smile, the one that looked warm until you noticed it. Never reached her eyes. Well, she said, voice dripping with what lesser mortals might mistake for sisterly support. Looks like someone's moving up in the world. Thanks, I said, keeping my voice level because I'd learned early that gratitude was a currency you couldn't overspend in corporate hallways, and enthusiasm was often mistaken for inexperience. Just remember, she continued, adjusting her statement. Necklace like she was calibrating a weapon. Big changes come with big expectations around here. We don't just promote people, we promote the right people, if you know what I mean. She let that hang in the air, perfume mixed with poison. Then clicked away, leaving me standing there wondering if congratulations always came with warnings attached. The rest of the day unfolded like a slow-motion car crash disguised as business as usual. Email threads that used to include me suddenly went quiet. The coffee machine area cleared when I approached, like I was carrying something contagious instead of a hard-earned promotion. Brandon Kim, the junior analyst who usually peppered me with questions about data modeling, spent the afternoon avoiding eye contact and typing furiously into Slack threads. I wasn't part of 5:30. I was sitting in my Honda Civic in the Veritas Edge parking garage, staring at the concrete walls and wondering if this was what victory was supposed to feel like. Hollow and cold, like winning a prize nobody wanted you to have. My phone buzzed. Lou checking in with her usual perfect time. How'd the announcement go? Her text read, followed by champagne emojis. I stared at the screen for a full minute before typing back. I got it. And I think I just painted a target on my back. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared. Then appeared again. Lou was choosing her word fully, which meant she was about to deliver one of those truths that hurt going down, but settled warm in your chest. Dahlia Marie Myles. She finally wrote, using my full name like my mother did when I was 7 and caught stealing cookies. You didn't spend 4 years juggling night classes and day jobs to worry about what Karen from marketing thinks about your promotion. You earned this with spreadsheets and strategy reports. Not luck, and definitely not whatever bullshit they're whispering about. She was right, of course. Lou was always right about the important things. but knowing you deserved something and feeling like you belonged were two different animals entirely, and right now I felt like I was feeding raw meat to the wrong one. I drove home through downtown Chicago watching the city lights blur past my windshield and thinking about all the credentials I'd collected: armor MBA from Northwestern, check performance reviews that made grown men weep, check 4 years of 15-hour days that turned my apartment into a library and my social life into a myth. Check, but none of that seemed to matter when Kendra looked at me like I was a puzzle. She couldn't wait to solve, and not in a good way. I parked outside my Lincoln Park studio apartment, the one I'd kept even after my salary could afford something bigger, because paying off student loans mattered more than impressing neighbors, and climbed 3 flights of stairs to my kingdom of second-hand furniture, first-class ambition, the framed MBA diploma Lou had given me as a graduation gift sat on my desk next to a stack of industry journals I actually read, and a coffee mug that said, "Nevertheless," she persisted, in fading letters. Tomorrow I'd walk back into Veritas Edge as lead analyst. Tomorrow I'd prove that Arjun's faith in me wasn't misplaced, and that whatever game Kendra was playing, I could play it better. But tonight I allowed myself 5 minutes of doubt, 5 minutes of wondering if I'd bitten off more than I could chew, and if the promotion I'd worked so hard for was about to become the thing that destroyed me. I poured myself a glass of wine from the bottle Lou had sent over with a note that said, "For when you're ready to celebrate properly," and toasted my empty apartment to the career I'd built one late night at a time, and to the fight I could feel coming like storm clouds on the horizon. The first crack in my professional facade came disguised as a mistake. Tuesday morning in the Q3 strategy meeting, when Jessica from Client Relations called me Mrs. Manning instead of Ms. Myles, then went white as printer paper when she realized what she'd said. The room went silent except for the hum of the projector and the sound of my heartbeat, hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. "Sorry," she stammered. I got confused. It's fine," I said, cutting her off before she could dig the hole deeper, but my hands were shaking when I reached for my water glass and I knew everyone saw it. Kendra was sitting 3 seats down examining her manicure like it contained the secrets of the universe, but I caught the corner of her mouth twitching upward in what someone generous might call a smile. After the meeting ended, and people scattered like roaches when the lights came on, I lingered in the conference room staring at the whiteboard where someone had written Q4 goals in aggressive red marker, wondering if I was losing my mind or if Jessica's slip had been less accidental than it appeared. Gerald Manning was a partner at Veritas Edge, old enough to be my father, about as likely to notice me romantically as he was to notice the office plants which he routinely forgot to water until they died. But rumors didn't need truth to grow, they just needed fertile ground, and apparently my promotion had tilled the soil perfectly. The whispers started small at first, anonymous Slack messages that found their way to my screen, like digital poison pen letters. "Heard our new lead analyst knows how to close deals in more ways than one." Read one message accidentally sent to a channel I was part of, followed immediately by "oops, wrong thread," and a series of laugh emojis that felt like tiny daggers. I screenshotted everything because Lou had taught me that in corporate warfare documentation was better than retaliation, and patience was better than both. But my jaw was starting to ache from clenching it so hard. Brandon Kim appeared at my desk around 2 afternoon, looking like he'd swallowed something unpleasant. "Hey Dahlia," he said, glancing around the office like he expected snipers. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Sure," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk, but he shook his head. "Not here," he muttered, "somewhere private." We ended up in the supply closet on the 14th floor, surrounded by boxes of copy paper and the smell of industrial cleaning supplies. Brandon ran his hands through his hair twice before he found his words. "Look," he said, "I don't know how to tell you this without sounding like I'm spreading gossip, but I think you should know what people are saying." My stomach dropped, but my voice stayed steady. "What are they saying?" He pulled out his phone, scrolled through what looked like a group chat, then turned the screen toward me. The messages were from the night before, time-stamped after business hours when people got sloppy with their digital discretion. New lead analyst must give great presentations. Read one, followed by several eggplant emojis. I hear she really knows how to work a room, said another. Wonder if Manning's wife knows about his mentoring style. Came the final blow, delivered with surgical precision. I stared at the screen, feeling something cold and sharp settle in my chest like a blade made of shame and fury. Who's in this group? I asked. Brandon scrolled up, showing me the member list. Kendra was there, along with Marcus from data analytics, Jennifer from accounting, and 3 others recognized by name, if not by friendship. How long has this been going on? I asked, handing his phone back. Since Monday, he said, the day after your announcement. I leaned against a shelf of printer toner and closed my eyes, letting the weight of it settle over me like a blanket made of concrete. They weren't just questioning my qualifications, they were rewriting the story of how I'd earned them, turning 4 years of sacrifice into a punchline about sex favors and bedroom politics. Did you screenshot these? I asked, opening my eyes. Brandon nodded, already ahead of me. I thought you might need them. Good, I said, standing up straighter, because if Kendra wanted to play dirty, I'd show her what clean looked like, by comparison. Thank you for telling me this. Couldn't have been easy. He shrugged. It's not right, what they're doing. You earned this promotion. I've seen your work. It's better than half the senior staff. I knew that. But hearing it from someone else felt like finding water in a desert. Brandon Kim, junior analyst, with the quiet voice and careful observations, might have just become my most valuable ally without even knowing it. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a bottle of wine and a legal pad, making lists, the way Lou had taught me in business school, when problems felt too big to solve. Lists of evidence, lists of witnesses, every email and performance review and late-night code commit that proved I was more than the sum of other people's fantasies about my sex life. The group chat screenshots went into a folder labeled documentation, along with my performance reviews from the past 2 years. The emails where I'd solve problems others couldn't. The project timelines that showed I'd been carrying Kendra's workload for months without credit or complaint. I called Lou at 10:30. Her voice thick with sleep, but alert, the moment she heard my tone. They're coming for you, aren't they? She said, because Lou had worked in enough corporate environments to recognize the sound of knives being sharpened. Yeah, I said they are. Good, she said. And I could hear her sitting up in bed, because that means you're dangerous enough to be worth destroying. And baby, that's when you know you've already won. The thing about building a case against someone who's been building cases against others for years is that they leave fingerprints everywhere. They just don't expect anyone to look for them. I started my excavation Wednesday morning with coffee that tasted like determination and a spreadsheet that would make forensic accountant weep with joy. First stop, the email archives, where Kendra's communication style revealed itself like a personality disorder made of passive aggression and strategic undermining. I found the thread from March where she'd forwarded my market analysis to the client without my name attached, claiming it was collaborative work from the team. I found the meeting notes from July where she'd attributed my automation script to departmental innovation, and my personal favorite, a September email where she'd told Arjun that my promotion might be premature given her limited FaceTime with leadership. FaceTime. I'd been working nights and weekends while she was networking at happy hours, but apparently showing up to client dinners mattered more than showing up to solve problems. I created a new folder on my desktop called Pattern Recognition and started feeding it everything. Timestamps on project deliverables that showed I was submitting work at 2 in the morning, while others were posting Instagram stories from rooftop bars, email threads where my questions went unanswered until I CC'd someone senior enough to demand responses, meeting minutes that somehow forgot to mention my contributions, while highlighting everyone else's. The deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. Kendra hadn't just been undermining me, she'd been systematically erasing me from the narrative of my own work for months, turning my innovations into team efforts and my solutions into happy accidents anyone could have stumbled across, given enough time and coffee. Brandon appeared at my desk around lunch, carrying a sandwich and wearing the expression of someone who'd found something he wasn't sure he wanted to share. "You're going to want to see this," he said, sliding his phone across my desk, cleaning out my downloads folder and found some Slack exports from last month. The file was labeled VE Strategy Team Archive and contained 3 weeks of messages from a private channel called Real Talk Strategy that I'd never been invited to join the conversations. Read like a masterclass in professional character assassination disguised as team building. Does anyone else think our new hire is trying too hard to prove herself? Kendra had written on my second day, "Some people mistake busy work for actual impact. I notice she stays late a lot." Marcus had replied, "Class A overcompensation." Maybe if she spent less time trying to impress IT and more time building relationships, she'd understand how things work around here. Jennifer had added, followed by a laughing emoji that felt like a slap. The conversation continued for pages, Kendra steering the narrative with surgical precision, turning my work ethic into evidence of social inadequacy and my technical skills into signs that I didn't understand the human side of business. It was brilliant in its cruelty and devastating in its effectiveness. I screenshotted everything, then sat back in my chair feeling like I just watched a wildlife documentary about corporate predators hunting in packs. They'd been circling me since day one, waiting for the right moment to strike, and my promotion had given them the opening they needed. That evening I spread everything across my dining room table like a detective solving a cold case, emails and screenshots and performance metrics arranged in chronological order, telling the story of a systematic campaign to undermine my credibility before I'd even had a chance to establish it. Lou arrived at 7 with Thai food and wine, taking one look at my makeshift war room before rolling up her sleeves. "Holy shit," she said, scanning the evidence. "This is next level petty, it's next level strategic." I corrected her. "Kendra's not just spreading gossip, she's been building a case against me for months, planting seeds that would bloom into exactly the kind of rumors that are circulating." Now Lou picked up a printed email, squinting at the timestamp. "This is from before you were even promoted. She was sabotaging you when you were still at analyst level. Because she knew I was competition," I said, even when I didn't know it myself. The doorbell rang, interrupting my spiral into corporate paranoia. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door I found a FedEx envelope with my name in Lou's handwriting. Inside was a certificate holder, and a note that said, "Time to remind them who they're dealing with." I opened the holder and found my MBA diploma professionally mounted, ready for framing. Lou had somehow managed to get it done in a single day, complete with museum-quality matting and a brass nameplate that read, "Dahlia Myles, MBA, Northwestern Kellogg School of Management, summa cum laude. You're putting this up tomorrow," she said when I looked at her with tears in my eyes. "Right behind your desk where everyone can see it, because credentials aren't just pieces of paper, they're shields, and baby, you're going to need armor for what's coming." I hung the diploma that night above my desk at home, practicing the speech I'd give if anyone had the audacity to question qualifications again. But part of me knew the real battle wouldn't be fought with words, it would be fought with patience and proof, and the kind of quiet strength that scared people more than any amount of shouting. Kendra thought she was playing chess, but she'd been playing checkers all along, moving pieces in obvious patterns, while I'd been learning the rules of a game she didn't even know existed. Tomorrow I'd start playing it, and by the time she realized what was happening it would be too late for her to change strategies. The hunt was about to become the hunted, and I had all documentation I needed to prove it. The calendar invite arrived Thursday morning at 9:15, like a corporate death warrant, disguised as a meeting request. "Alignment discussion," it said in that neutral HR language that made everything sound like team building when it was really team destruction. "Scheduled for 2 p.m. in conference room C, the one with glass walls that turned private conversations into public spectacles for anyone walking past." Melina Cruz had sent it along with Kendra and me, no agenda attached, just the kind of sterile corporate speak that made my coffee taste like anxiety. Knew this wasn't about alignment, this was about Kendra making her move, the kind of calculated strike that came wrapped in concern for workplace harmony and team dynamics. I forwarded the invite to Lou with a single word, showtime, and she responded with 3 emojis, a knife, a crown, and a fire symbol, which translated roughly to cut a bitch and take your throne, but make it look elegant. Brandon appeared at my desk 20 minutes before the meeting, carrying a USB drive and wearing the expression of someone who'd discovered buried treasure in a graveyard. I found something else, he said, glancing around the office, like he expected corporate snipers. You're going to want this. The USB contained a Slack export from a private channel called Leadership Concerns, that included Kendra, Marcus, and Jennifer discussing their observations about my hostile behavior and resistance to team collaboration. The messages read like they'd been crafted by a committee of lawyers and mean girls working together to build a case that looked professional on the surface, but felt personal in every line. I've noticed Dahlia seems defensive when receiving feedback. Kendra had written Tuesday night. Yesterday she seemed dismissive when I offered to help with her transition. She definitely keeps to herself, Marcus had added. Not very approachable. I worry about team morale, Jennifer had concluded. Some of the junior staff have mentioned feeling intimidated. It was beautiful in its corporate viciousness. Every accusation designed to sound like legitimate workplace concern while being impossible to disprove. How do you prove you're not defensive? How do you demonstrate approachability to people who've already decided you're the enemy? I loaded my own USB drive with everything I'd collected over the past week, the email threads, the project timelines, the performance reviews, the screenshots of Kendra's private channels where she'd been building her case against me. Since before I'd even been promoted, if she wanted to play HR games, I'd show her what a real case file looked like. Conference room C felt like a fishbowl when I walked in. Melina was already seated with a legal pad and that carefully neutral expression HR people perfected in training, the kind of face that revealed nothing, while seeing everything. Kendra arrived 2 minutes late, carrying a portfolio and wearing her most concerned smile, the one that said she was here to help, not hurt. Let's start with some ground rules, Melina said. Once we were settled, this is a safe space for honest communication. We're here to address some concerns that have been raised about team dynamics and find constructive solutions. Ken leaned forward slightly, her portfolio unopened but ready. I appreciate you making time for this, Melina. I know these conversations aren't easy, but I felt it was important to address some behaviors I've observed since Dahlia's promotion. I stayed quiet, letting her build her gallows with her own rope. There seems to be some resistance to collaborative feedback, she continued, and I've noticed a pattern of defensive responses when team members try to offer support or guidance. It's creating tension that's affecting the whole department. Melina made notes without looking up. Can you give me specific examples? While Kendra opened her portfolio, revealing printed emails and what looked like a prepared timeline yesterday. In the strategy meeting, when Jessica accidentally used the wrong name. Dahlia's reaction was quite sharp and it made everyone uncomfortable. I felt my jaw clench, but kept my voice level. Jessica called me Mrs. Manning instead of Ms. Myles. I said that was Jessica's mistake, not mine. Kendra's smile tightened, but that's exactly what I mean. The defensive response. Instead of gracious correction, it makes people afraid to speak freely around you. That's interesting, I said, reaching for my own folder, because I have some documentation that might provide additional context. I slid a printed copy of the Real Talk Strategies Slack thread across the table, watching Kendra's face as she recognized her own words coming back to haunt her. This shows a pattern of coordinated undermining that began before my promotion was even announced. Melina's pen stopped moving as she scanned the messages, her expression shifting from neutral to something harder to read. There's more. I continued, pulling out the USB drive email threads, where my work was attributed to others' meeting notes that erased my contributions. Project timelines, showing I was completing tasks assigned to other team members while they were networking at happy hours. Kendra's portfolio suddenly seemed less impressive against the mountain of evidence I'd assembled her, prepared talking points wilting under the weight of documented patterns and time-stamped proof. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I also have this, I said, producing the final piece of my puzzle, a printed email from Gerald Manning himself sent Wednesday night after Brandon had warned him about the rumors circulating about us. Melina read it aloud. For the record, I was in Singapore for 2 weeks during the period in question meeting with our Pacific Rim clients. I have had no personal interactions with Ms. Myles outside of standard business meetings, and I find these rumors both baseless and professionally damaging. The room went quiet except for the sound of Kendra's manicured nails tapping against the conference table. A nervous rhythm that betrayed her careful composure. I need some time to review all of this, Melina said, finally collecting the documents and USB drives from both sides. This is clearly a complex situation that requires thorough investigation. Kendra tried one last gambit, leaning forward with that practiced concern, I just want what's best for the team. Melina, I'm worried that if we don't address these communication issues, now they'll only get worse. Melina stood, signaling the end of the meeting. I'll be conducting individual interviews with relevant team members over the next few days. Until then, I expect all parties to maintain professional behavior and avoid any discussion about this matter with other staff members. As we filed out of the conference room, I caught Kendra's reflection in the glass wall. Her mask had slipped just enough to reveal the panic underneath. She'd expected to walk into a mediation session where I'd be defensive, and she'd look reasonable. Instead, she'd walked into a courtroom where I'd brought evidence, and she'd brought opinions. Brandon was waiting by my desk when I returned, looking like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. How did it go? He asked. Like watching someone try to put out a fire with gasoline. I said, but the real question is, what happens next? Friday morning arrived like a verdict wrapped in corporate politeness. Melina Cruz had spent the previous day conducting what she called informal interviews with half the department, while I tried to work normally despite feeling like I was waiting for a jury to decide my professional fate. The office had that crackling tension you get before thunderstorms when the air pressure drops, and everyone can feel the lightning coming. My computer pinged at 8:30 with an email from Arjun requesting a closed-door meeting at 9. His office was 3 doors down from the executive suite. All dark wood and awards that made you remember he'd built his career on being right about people. More often than not. Come in, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk that faced away from the door. I wanted to talk to you before the day gets complicated. My stomach dropped, but I kept my voice steady. Is this about the 8R investigation? He nodded, pulling out a manila folder that looked thick enough to contain my entire professional life. Melina shared her preliminary findings with me. As your supervisor, I thought you should know what they uncovered. The folder contained printouts of everything I'd submitted, plus additional materials. Melina had apparently excavated from company servers, deleted Slack messages that had been recovered from backup systems, email drafts that had never been sent, browser histories that showed the timing of when certain rumors had been researched and planted. This one's particularly interesting, Arjun said, sliding a screenshot across the desk. It was from Kendra's computer, showing a Google search for how to document employee hostile behavior, conducted at 11 p.m. Tuesday night, 2 hours after my promotion had been announced. Was building a case before there was anything to build a case about, I said. Exactly. He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked tired. Dahlia, I owe you an apology. I should have seen this coming. Kendra's been here long enough to know how to work the system. Let my trust in institutional processes blind me to what was actually happening. What happens now? I asked. Melina's recommending a formal disciplinary review for Kendra. He said, falsifying documentation, creating hostile work environments, coordinating harassment campaigns. These aren't minor infractions, they're terminable offenses. I felt something loosen in my chest like a knot I'd been carrying for months was finally coming undone. But the relief was mixed with exhaustion, the kind that comes from fighting battles you never should have had to fight. There's something else, he continued. Gerald Manning called me personally yesterday. He's furious about being dragged into this mess. Apparently he's been getting calls from board members asking if there's any truth to the rumors. Kendra started. Oh God, I said, mortified. He assured them and me that his interactions with you have been minimal and entirely professional. He also mentioned that he was impressed by your Q3 strategy analysis, said it was some of the most thorough market research he'd seen in years. I blinked. That analysis had been buried in a team report with Kendra's name on the cover. He requested a copy with proper attribution, sliding another paper across the desk. This is a commendation letter for your personnel file, recognizing your contributions to the Pacific Rim expansion strategy. Something that should have happened months ago. My phone buzzed with a text from Lou. Lunch today. I'm buying champagne or bail money depending on how things went. I typed back. Champagne. But make it expensive, we're celebrating survival. The day continued with a series of small victories that felt like pieces of my reputation being handed back to me one by one. Brandon stopped by to tell me he'd been interviewed by Melina and provided additional documentation of Kendra's coordination efforts. Jennifer from accounting sent an awkward apology email saying she'd been caught up in office dynamics and wanted to reset our professional relationship. But the real vindication came at 4:30 when Gerald Manning himself appeared at my desk, carrying a coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd spent the morning putting out fires. Miss Myles, he said, I wanted to speak with you personally about this situation. I stood feeling like I should salute or genuflect or at least offer him my chair. Please sit, he said. Won't take long. I just wanted you to know that I've been made aware of the rumors circulating about our supposed relationship. And I want to state unequivocally that they're baseless and professionally damaging. Thank you, sir, I said. He held up a hand. I also want you to know that your work on the Pacific Rim analysis was exceptional, thorough market research, innovative strategy recommendations, and flawless execution. I've requested that Arjun ensure you receive proper credit for your contributions. I felt tears pricking at my eyes but managed to keep my voice steady. I appreciate that. One more thing, he said, leaning slightly closer. I've been in this business for 25 years. And I can tell the difference between someone who's earned their position and someone who's been handed one. You've earned yours. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. After he left, I sat at my desk staring at my computer screen, feeling like I'd just been handed back pieces of myself I'd forgotten were missing. The diploma behind my desk caught the afternoon light, and for the first time since Monday it felt like armor. Instead of a target, Lou arrived at 5:30, carrying champagne and wearing a grin that could have powered the Willis Tower. So she said, popping the cork right there in my cubicle, while the rest of the office pretended not to watch. How does it feel to be professionally vindicated? Like winning a war? I didn't know I was fighting, I said, except you. A plastic cup of Veuve Clicquot. Good, she said, because now comes the fun part. What's the fun part? Making sure she never gets the chance to do this to anyone else. Monday morning brought the quarterly board presentation and with it the kind corporate theater that separated the players from the audience. Kendra had been scheduled to present the department metrics for weeks back when she thought she'd be showcasing her leadership skills, instead of defending her employment status, but Melina's investigation was still ongoing, and appearances had to be maintained. I arrived at 7:30 to find the presentation room already set up with Kendra's laptop connected to the projector. Her slides loaded and ready to display the kind of polished corporate storytelling that made numbers dance and metrics sing, except I knew something she didn't. Those numbers were about to tell a very different story than the one she'd prepared. She walked in at 8, wearing her lucky red blazer, the one she saved for important meetings, and carrying herself like nothing had changed, like the past week of HR interviews and evidence gathering had been an inconvenient interruption rather than a professional reckoning. "Morning, Dahlia," she said with that practiced smile. "I assume you're here to provide technical support." "Something like that," I said, checking my own laptop bag where I'd loaded a backup presentation, one that told the real story behind the metrics. The board members began filtering in at 8:15. Gerald Manning nodded at me as he passed while Kendra busied herself with last-minute slide adjustments that seemed more nervous than necessary. Arjun appeared carrying coffee and wearing the expression of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen, but couldn't warn anyone without spoiling the surprise. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kendra began once everyone was seated, "I'm excited to share our Q3 performance metrics, which demonstrate the innovative strategies our team has implemented this quarter." She clicked to the first slide and nothing happened. The screen remained frozen on the title page, while her laptop made the kind of mechanical wheezing sound that meant something had gone very wrong with the data feed. She clicked again, harder this time, as if force of will could resurrect dead pixels. "Technical difficulties," she laughed, but the sound was strained. "Let me restart this," while she fumbled with cables and cursed technology under her breath. I stood and walked to the front of the room where a second laptop waited, the one I'd prepared for exactly this scenario. "If I may," I said, connecting my machine to the projector, "I have a backup of the presentation slides that appeared weren't Kendra's. They were mine. Same data, different story," where her version had attributed team achievements to collaborative leadership. Mine showed individual contributions with timestamps and documentation where she'd highlighted innovative strategies. I'd include footnotes showing which team members had actually developed each approach. But the real coup de grace came on slide 15, where instead of Kendra's carefully crafted narrative about departmental growth, I'd included a breakdown of actual work allocation showing that 60% of the project, credited to team leadership, had been completed by me during nights and weekends, while others were networking at industry events. The room went quiet except for the hum of the projector and the sound of Gerald Manning turning pages in his notebook, where he was taking detailed notes. "This data architecture is fascinating," he said, looking directly at me. "Can you walk us through the automation protocols that generated these reports?" I spent the next 20 minutes explaining systems I'd built and processes I'd optimized, while Kendra sat frozen in her chair watching her carefully construct narrative crumble into documented reality. Every question from the board revealed another layer of work that had my fingerprints on it, and my solutions embedded in it. When I reached the final slide, the one that simply read, "All data authenticated, all contributions documented, respect is earned," room stayed silent for a full 10 seconds before Gerald Manning started clapping. "Exceptional work," he said, looking around the table. "This is exactly the kind of thorough analysis we need for our Q4 planning." After the board members filed out discussing implementation timelines and resource allocation, Kendra remained seated, staring at the blank projector screen like it might resurrect her professional reputation through sheer force of denial. "You sabotaged my presentation," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't sabotage anything," I said, packing up my laptop. "I just made sure the right person got credit for their work." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This isn't over, Dahlia." "Actually, I think it is," I said, "because by this afternoon Melina's investigation will be complete, and your little campaign to destroy my reputation will officially become grounds for termination." I walked toward the door, then paused. "You know what's funny, Kendra? You spent so much time trying to prove I didn't deserve this promotion that you forgot to actually do the work that would have made you deserve it instead." The door closed behind me with a satisfying click, leaving her alone with the consequences of underestimating someone who'd learned to fight with facts instead of fiction. My phone buzzed with a text from Lou, who'd been watching from the observation deck. That wasn't just a presentation, that was a masterclass in professional assassination. She'd written, "Proud I might cry." I typed back, "Save the tears, we're not done yet." Because while I'd won this battle, the war wouldn't be over until Kendra could never do this to anyone else. and I had one more move to make that would ensure she remembered this lesson for the rest of her career. Tuesday morning brought the kind of silence that meant someone was missing from the office ecosystem. The way a forest gets quiet when a predator leaves, but the prey animals aren't sure it's really gone. Kendra's desk sat empty, her computer monitor dark, her motivational quotes about teamwork and excellence mocking the space where she used to orchestrate character assassinations. Disguised as collaboration, Melina had delivered the verdict Monday afternoon via email: professional and devastating, 3 months unpaid suspension pending formal disciplinary review, followed by what everyone understood to be a polite way of saying start updating your LinkedIn profile. But Kendra wasn't the type to go quietly into corporate obscurity. I should have known she'd try one last desperate gambit when Brandon appeared at my desk at 10:30. Carrying his laptop and wearing the expression of someone who'd discovered a bomb in the supply closet. "We have a problem," he said, setting his computer down and pulling up the network monitoring dashboard. There were login attempts on the legacy FTP server last night, using credentials that should have been deactivated. "Show me," I said, leaning closer to see the screen. The log showed access attempts at 11:47 p.m. and again at 12:15 a.m. Someone had been trying to breach old file systems that contained archived client data, project templates, and what we called the Golden Archive, 5 years' worth of strategy documents that new hires used for reference material. The IP address traced back to Kendra's home network. "She's trying to download client files," Brandon said, his voice tight with the kind of controlled panic IT people get when they discover security breaches. I caught it because I set up monitoring alerts after Melina asked me to track unusual system activity. "What did she access?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would make my blood pressure spike. "That's the thing she didn't get in." But not for lack of trying. The system flagged the attempts as suspicious and locked her out after the third failed password. "But look at this." He scrolled down to show me the access logs from last week before her suspension went into effect. The data export was massive: client contact lists, project methodologies, strategy frameworks that had taken our team years to develop. She'd downloaded everything she could get her hands on before pulled her credentials, creating what looks suspiciously like a corporate escape plan. "I need to call Melina," I said, reaching for my phone, but Brandon caught my arm. "There's more," he said. "She's not just stealing, she's destroying. Look at these deletion attempts." The logs showed systematic attempts to purge files from shared drives, project folders that had been cleaned out, presentation templates that had vanished overnight, code repositories that had been scrubbed of documentation. It was digital arson designed to leave behind a wasteland where collaborative knowledge used to live. "She's trying to salt the earth," I said, understanding the scope of her vindictiveness. "And she's not done." Brandon pulled up another screen. "This shows remote access attempts on the backup servers, the ones that contain archived client communications. If she gets into those, she could access 5 years' worth of confidential correspondence." The implications hit me like ice water in veins. Client lists taken to competitors, confidential strategies handed over to rivals, years' worth of institutional knowledge deleted out of spite. It wasn't just corporate sabotage, it was professional terrorism. I called Melina, who answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting for this exact crisis. "How bad is it?" she asked after I explained what Brandon had discovered. "Bad enough that we need to involve legal," I said, "and possibly law enforcement if she's stealing client data. We're talking about breach of contract, industrial espionage, the kind of stuff that ends careers and starts lawsuits." "I'll be there in 10 minutes, she said. "Call Arjun and tell him to secure any sensitive files immediately." The next hour unfolded like a corporate thriller. Arjun arrived with the head of IT, who began implementing emergency security protocols, while Melina called the legal department, and I documented every attempted breach with screenshots and timestamps. The office buzzed with the kind of energy you get when everyone knows something big is happening. But nobody wants to be the first to ask what. By noon we had confirmation that Kendra had successfully downloaded client contact lists from 3 major accounts along with strategy documents that contained proprietary methodologies. Our legal team was already drafting cease and desist letters, while IT worked to assess the full scope of the damage. But the final nail in her professional coffin came at 2:30 when Brandon discovered something that made everyone in the room go silent. Kendra had been uploading files to a personal cloud drive, one that she'd apparently shared with someone at Core Analytics, the boutique marketing firm that had just announced her hiring as senior strategy director. She wasn't just stealing art, she was selling it to her new employer. That evening, I sat in Arjun's office, watching him compose what he called a courtesy email to Core's CEO, though there was nothing courteous about the message he was sending, along with time-stamped evidence of data theft and corporate espionage. "They'll fire her before she finishes her first week," he said, hitting send on the email that would end Kendra's career at her new company, before it had even properly started. "How can you be sure?" I asked. "Because corporate America is a small world," he said, "and nobody wants to hire someone who brings lawsuits and federal investigations as their welcome gift." My phone buzzed with a text from Lou, who'd been following the drama through my increasingly frantic updates throughout the day. "Please tell me you have popcorn for this corporate dumpster fire," she'd written. I typed back, "I don't need popcorn. I have front row seats," and she bought her own lighter fluid. 20 minutes later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. But when I answered, a familiar voice launched into what sounded like a prepared speech about misunderstandings and professional courtesy. It was Kendra calling from what she probably thought was an untraceable number. "Dahlia, I know we've had our differences, but I think we can work this out professionally." The audacity was breathtaking. She'd spent the last 24 hours trying to burn down everything I'd built, and now wanted to negotiate like we were discussing lunch plans. "Kendra," I said, keeping my voice calm, "there's nothing to work out. You stole client data, attempted to sabotage company systems, and violated about 12 different clauses in your employment contract." "That's a very harsh interpretation," she said, and I could hear the desperation bleed through her corporate speak. "I was simply backing up my work files for transition purposes." "Your work files," I repeated, "including client contact lists. You never had authorization to access and strategy documents that predate your involvement in those accounts." The line went quiet for 10 seconds before she tried a different approach. "Look, I know you're angry about the promotion situation, but destroying my career isn't going to make you feel better." "You're right," I said, "it won't make me feel better. But watching you face the consequences of your own choices is surprisingly satisfying." I hung up and immediately called Melina to report the contact attempt, because even in defeat, Kendra was still trying to manipulate the narrative, still believing she could charm her way out of federal crimes and breach of contract lawsuits. But this time there would be no corporate politeness, no mediation session, no chance for her to rewrite the story. She'd written it herself in deleted files and stolen data, and midnight attempts to access systems she no longer had any right to touch. The only thing left was watching her read the final chapter Wednesday morning. Brought news that felt like Christmas morning. Justice and karma wrapped in a corporate bow. Core Analytics had terminated Kendra's employment, effective immediately after receiving what their legal department described as compelling evidence of corporate espionage and data theft. She'd lasted exactly 48 hours at her new job before her past caught up with her, like a process server with a grudge. But I wasn't satisfied with professional exile. I wanted insurance that she'd never get the chance to destroy another woman's career, the way she'd tried to destroy mine, which meant following one last thread that had been at me since Brandon discovered the data theft. The FTP server logs showed she'd accessed files dating back 3 years, but there was a gap in the timeline, a missing piece that suggested she'd been planning this extraction for longer than anyone realized. I spent my lunch break digging through archived backup systems, looking for patterns that would reveal the full scope of her duplicity. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Hidden in a subfolder labeled Personal Development Resources was a trove of documents that read like a master class in corporate sabotage performance review she'd artificially deflated for colleagues who threatened her position, meeting notes, where she'd systematically undermined credit attribution project timelines that had been altered to make her contributions look larger and other people's work seem less significant. But the smoking gun was a folder labeled succession planning that contained what could only be described as hit lists, detailed analyses of every colleague she perceived as competition, complete with personal information, weaknesses she could exploit, and strategies for discrediting their fit. I kept my voice neutral. I thought they should know what really happened to their careers. What you've done here goes beyond professional vindication, she continued. You've potentially uncovered professional reputations. My name was on page 3 along with notes that made my blood run cold. D. Myles, MBA, overqualified, insecure about social connections, works too hard, potential angle, exploit imposter syndrome, or suggest academic achievements compensate for practical inexperience. She'd been sting me like a predator studies prey, cataloging my vulnerabilities and planning her attack with the kind of methodical precision that would have been impressive if it hadn't been sociopathic. I printed everything, then sat back in my chair feeling like I'd just uncovered a serial killer's trophy collection. Each document represented someone whose career she'd tried to damage, someone who'd been reduced to bullet points in her personal war against competence. Lou arrived at my apartment that evening carrying wine and wearing the expression of someone who'd been summoned to witness either a celebration or a breakdown. You found something else, didn't you? She said, taking one look at the documents spread across my dining table. I found her playbook, I said, handing her the succession planning folder. She's been doing this for years. Lou systematically targeting anyone who posed a threat to her position. Lou flipped through the pages, her expression shifting from disbelief to disgust to something approaching admiration for the sheer audacity of it. Holy shit, she said. This is like reading the manifesto of a corporate serial killer. The question is, what do I do with it? I said. Because this isn't just about me anymore. There are 8 other people in these files, people who probably never understood why their careers stalled or why they suddenly became office pariahs. Lou set down the folder and looked at me with the kind of intensity that meant she was about to deliver one of her life-changing pronouncements. You send this to everyone. She targeted, she said. And you make sure they know exactly who was pulling the strings behind their professional struggles. That felt like overkill, I said. No, she interrupted, that felt like justice. Some of these people are probably still at Veritas Ed, wondering why they never got promoted, why their ideas got stolen, why they suddenly became invisible. This gives them answers, and more importantly, it gives them ammunition. She was right, of course. Lou was always right about the nuclear options. That's why she ran a successful startup while I'd been playing defense in corporate politics for years. I spent Thursday morning crafting what I thought of as the revelation email. A carefully worded message that outlined Kendra's systematic campaign of professional sabotage backed by timestamp documentation and her own planning notes. I sent it to every current and former Veritas Edge employee whose name appeared in her files, along with a note that they were free to use the information however they saw fit. The responses started coming in within hours, former colleagues thanking me for solving mysteries that had haunted their careers, employees expressing shock at the scope of Kendra's manipulation, and 3 separate messages from people who said they were forwarding the evidence to their lawyers. But the response that mattered most came from Melina, who called me at 2:30 with what sounded like barely controlled glee in her voice. Dahlia, she said, I just received a very interesting package from our legal department. It seems several former employees are considering wrongful termination suits based on evidence you provide. I kept my voice neutral. I thought they should know what really happened to their careers. What you've done here goes beyond professional vindication, she continued. You've potentially uncovered systematic harassment that could result in federal investigations. This isn't just about one person's bad behavior anymore. This is about institutional failure to protect employees from coordinated workplace abuse. The Friday afternoon, the story had spread through the marketing industry like wildfire. 3 trade publications had picked up reports of the Veritas Edge data breach scandal, and Kendra's name was being whispered in the same breath as corporate espionage and systematic workplace harassment. Her LinkedIn profile disappeared sometime before noon. I was packing up my desk Friday evening when Arjun stopped by carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing the expression of someone who'd just watched justice served with a side of professional satisfaction. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for handling this situation with such professionalism and thoroughness." "I didn't do anything special," I said, "just documented what was happening." He shook his head. "What you did was protect not just yourself, but countless other employees who might have fallen victim to the same treatment that takes courage and intelligence, and a level of strategic thinking that frankly impressed the hell out of everyone in senior leadership." The champagne was Dom Perignon, the kind they reserved for major client wins and successful IPOs. "What's this for?" I asked. "Consider it a down payment," he said, "on the conversation we're going to have Monday morning about your future here." As I drove home through downtown Chicago watching the city lights blur past my windshield, I thought about all the credentials I'd collected over the years: the MBA, the performance reviews, the late-night work sessions that had built my reputation, one spreadsheet at a time. But the credential that mattered most wasn't hanging on my wall or filed in my personnel folder. It was the knowledge that when someone tried to destroy me, I'd had patience and intelligence to destroy them back using nothing but the truth and their own arrogance. Some credentials you earn in classrooms, others you earn in corporate war zones, and the most valuable ones are the ones nobody can fake. Monday morning brought the kind of opportunity that arrives, disguised as routine, until you realize it's actually a coronation. Arjun's office felt different this time, less like a conference room, and more like a strategy session between equals. The champagne bottle from Friday sat empty on his bookshelf like a trophy commemorating the end of one era. "Beginning of another. I have a proposition for you," he said, sliding a folder across his desk, the kind of thick portfolio that usually contained either termination papers or life-changing promotions. And something about his expression suggested this wasn't a pink slip conversation. "Veritas Edge implementing a new position," he continued, "Director of Systems Strategy, reporting directly to the C-suite. We need someone who understands both the technical infrastructure and the human dynamics that make or break organizational culture." I opened the folder and found a job description that read like someone had reverse engineered my skill set into a corporate title: oversight of data integrity protocols, development of ethical automation frameworks, and what they called institutional culture architecture, which translated roughly to making sure nobody else could do what Kendra had done. Salary number made me blink twice. "There's more," he said. "We want you to develop a workshop series for the entire company, something that addresses the gaps in our professional development around collaboration, accountability, and what happens when technical expertise meets workplace politics. You want me to teach other people how to defend themselves," I said, understanding the subtext. "I want you to teach them how to build systems that don't require defense in the first place." He corrected: "Systems where merit is transparent, contribution is documented, and manipulation becomes impossible because the data tells the truth." It was brilliant in its scope. The kind of role that would let me rebuild corporate culture from the inside out, using everything I'd learned during my trial by fire with Kendra as a blueprint for what never to allow again. "I'll need Brandon as my direct report," I said, testing boundaries of my newfound leverage. "Already approved," Arjun smiled. "He's been promoted to senior analyst with a focus on ethical data management. Turns out documenting corporate espionage is excellent preparation for preventing it." That afternoon I stood in conference room A, the same glass-walled space where Kendra had tried to destroy my reputation 3 weeks earlier, facing 25 employees who'd gathered for what I'd titled the automation myth, when credit goes where it wasn't earned. I'd spent the weekend crafting a presentation that used our recent crisis as a case study in institutional failure, without mentioning names or pointing fingers, just data patterns and system vulnerabilities that had allowed one person to manipulate multiple careers through strategic misinformation. The first slide read, Technical competence without ethical frameworks creates systems that serve power instead of truth. I talked about automation protocols that could track individual contributions, time-stamped documentation that made credit theft impossible, and communication systems that created transparency instead of enabling manipulation. The audience took notes like they were studying for finals, which in a way they were. During the Q&A session, 3 junior analysts approached the microphone with questions that sounded more like confessions. What do you do when someone takes credit for your work but you can't prove it? How do you document collaboration with seeming paranoid? Is it normal to feel like you have to work twice as hard to get half the recognition? The last question came from Maria Santos, a data specialist who'd been with the company for 2 years and looked like she'd been carrying the weight of professional disappointment for most. That time I recognized the expression because I'd worn it myself for longer than I cared to admit. I walked closer to the microphone, letting my voice carry the authority I'd earned through surviving what they were still enduring. It's not normal, I said. And it's not acceptable. And starting today, going to build systems that make it impossible. After the session ended and people filed out in small groups discussing implementation strategies and policy changes, Brandon lingered behind, wearing the expression of someone who'd just watched his mentor become a leader. You know what the best part of all this is, he said. What's that? I asked, packing up my laptop. 3 weeks ago, you were documenting everything because you had to defend yourself. Now you're teaching other people to document everything, so they'll never have to. Lou arrived at my apartment that evening carrying champagne and Thai food and wearing a grin that could have powered the Willis Tower for a week. So she said, unpacking containers of pad Thai and green curry. How does it feel to go from target to teacher in less than a month? Like winning a war by changing the rules of engagement, I said, accepting a glass of champagne tasted like vindication and possibility mixed in equal parts. She raised her glass to mine. Here's to the credentials. Nobody can fake competence, character, and the kind of quiet power that rebuilds systems instead of just surviving them. We spent the evening planning my new role, discussing workshop curricula and ethical frameworks and all the ways we could weaponize transparency against future Kendras, who might think they could manipulate their way to the top. But the moment that mattered most came when I hung my MBA diploma in my new office, not as armor against imposter syndrome, but as a reminder that some achievements are earned through midnight oil and morning coffee, through spreadsheets that tell the truth and code that automates integrity. The nameplate on my door read, Dahlia Myles, Director of System Strategy, but the real title was simpler: Architect of the Kind of Workplace where truth matters more than politics, where data beats gossip, and where the only credentials that count are the ones you can document with timestamps and evidence. Kendra had tried to destroy me using whispers and manipulation, but she'd accidentally created something more dangerous than she could have imagined: a woman who understood both systems and people, who knew how to build infrastructure that served justice instead of ego. The best revenge wasn't destroying her career, it was making sure nobody like her could ever destroy another career again. Some people build empires, others systems that make empires impossible, and sometimes those are the same thing. 6 months later, I stood in my corner office, watching downtown Chicago stretch toward Lake Michigan, through floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected my diploma back at me like a reminder of how far I'd traveled from the first day. When nobody clapped for my promotion, the nameplate on my door read, Dahlia Myles, Director of System Strategy, but the real title was Architect of the Kind of Workplace where truth automated itself into every process, every decision, every promotion that mattered. The office renovation had been completed last week. Mahogany desk that could seat 6 people for strategy sessions, bookshelves lined with industry publications I actually contributed to now, and a conference table where I held what Brandon had started calling integrity audits, with department heads who wanted to understand why their teams suddenly performed better when documentation became transparent. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder that made me smile. All hands meeting quarterly results, the same kind of gathering where my promotion had landed like a corporate funeral 6 months ago. Except, this time, I'd be presenting numbers that told stories about institutional transformation and cultural architecture, instead of defending my right to exist in leadership. The quarterly report sitting on my desk contained metrics that would have made my night school professors weep with pride. Employee satisfaction, up 37% across all departments. Retention rates that had reversed their downward trajectory, and what the C-suite called innovation indicators, showing that when people stopped worrying about credit theft, they started sharing ideas again. But the number that mattered most was buried on page 12, zero documented cases of systematic workplace harassment. Since we'd implemented the new transparency protocols, it turned out that predators like Kendra required shadows to hunt, and we'd flooded the building with fluorescent accountability, that manipulation impossible. Brandon appeared in my doorway carrying coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd just discovered buried treasure in the quarterly data. "You need to see this," he said, sliding a printout across my desk. The exit interview. Analytics from HR. The document showed departure patterns over the past 3 years, with a fascinating correlation. People who'd left Veritas Edge during Kendra's tenure had cited lack of advancement opportunities and unclear performance expectations, at rates that would have triggered federal investigations if anyone had been paying attention. But the pattern had shifted dramatically since her departure. New hires were staying longer, contributing more and reporting higher job satisfaction levels, while legacy employees who'd survived her reign were suddenly finding their careers unstuck from whatever invisible molasses had been holding them back. "It's like she was a systemic infection," Brandon said, and removing her allowed the whole organism to heal. The comparison was apt, but incomplete. Kendra hadn't been the disease she'd been a symptom of. Systems that prioritized networking over competence, charm over contribution, institutional politics over documented merit. The real cure had been rebuilding those systems from the ground up, using everything I'd learned about corporate warfare during my trial by fire. At 2 o'clock I walked into the main conference room where 50 employees had gathered for the quarter presentation. The same faces that had watched my promotion announcement with polite skepticism now looked at me with something approaching respect, mixed with curiosity about what institutional changes were coming next. "Good afternoon, everyone," I began, clicking to my first slide, which read, "Root: How Transparency Became Our Competitive Advantage." The presentation covered our transformation metrics, but more importantly, it told the story of how documenting everything had accidentally created a culture where innovation flourished, because people stopped hoarding ideas and started building each other's work, where promotions became predictable, because performance data spoke louder than office politics, and where new hires felt safe to contribute immediately because manipulation had become structurally impossible. During the Q&A period, Sarah Martinez from Client Services raised her hand with a question that made the entire room lean forward. "Dahlia, how do we maintain this culture when leadership changes, or when someone tries to game the new systems?" It was the question I'd been hoping someone would ask because it let me share the final piece of the puzzle we'd been building. "The beauty of automated integrity," I said, "is that it becomes self-reinforcing when documentation is transparent. Credit theft becomes obvious when contribution tracking is real-time performance reviews. Write themselves when communication protocols are recorded. Manipulation leaves digital fingerprints that are impossible to erase." I clicked to my final slide, which showed a network diagram of our new organizational structure, where data flowed upward automatically, where individual contributions were tagged and timestamped, and where the kind of systematic undermining Kendra had orchestrated trigger alerts before it could damage careers. "We didn't just survive an attack on our institutional culture," I continued. "We used it to build immunity against future attacks." After the meeting ended, and people filed out discussing implementation details and asking follow-up questions about process improvements. Gerald Manning approached carrying a folder that looked suspiciously like the kind that contained life-changing documents. "Ms. Myles," he said, "I wanted to speak with you about something the board has been discussing." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice steady, of course. He opened the folder revealing what looked like an organizational chart with my name in a box that reported directly to the CEO position. "Veritas Edge is expanding into 3 new markets this year, and we need someone to oversee the cultural integration process to ensure our transparency protocols scale with our growth." The title read, Vice President of Organizational Integrity, with a salary that made my MBA debt look like a rounding error. "We want you to be the architect of our institutional DNA." He continued to build the kind of company culture that becomes a competitive advantage, because talent wants to work somewhere. Their contributions matter more than their networking abilities. I accepted the position that afternoon, then called Lou, who screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear before she composed herself enough to speak in complete sentences. "You know what this means," she said after I'd explained the new role. "What's that?" I asked. "You didn't just survive corporate warfare, you won. So decisively that they're making you Secretary of Defense." That evening, I sat in my apartment, staring at the framed MBA diploma that had started this journey as armor against imposter syndrome, ended it as a reminder that some credentials can't be faked, earned, or stolen. They have to be forged in the fires of institutional transformation and tempered by the kind of quiet strength that rebuilds systems instead of just surviving them. My phone buzzed with a text from Brandon, who'd promoted to Associate Director of Data Ethics, with his own team, and a mandate to prevent the next Kendra before she could start her first whisper campaign. "Saw the news about your promotion," he'd written. "Does this mean I should start calling you VP Myles?" I typed back, "Only if you want me to document every casual conversation for the next 6 months. Point taken," he replied, followed by laughing emojis. 6 months ago I'd been fighting for my professional life against someone who thought credentials were things you could steal or discredit or manipulate away from their rightful owners. But credentials aren't documents hanging on walls. They're systems you build, cultures you transform, and the kind of institutional change that outlasts any individual career. The real credential was knowing that when someone tried to destroy me, I'd used their attack to build something better than what existed before, something that would protect people I'd never meet from predators I'd never encounter, because integrity had become automated into the very foundation of how we operated. Kendra had wanted to prove I didn't deserve my promotion, but she'd accidentally proven something more important, that I deserved to redesign the entire system that had made her possible in the first place. Some people climb corporate ladders, others build elevators that lift everyone, and sometimes those are the same thing. The view from the top was spectacular, but the real satisfaction came from knowing that the systems I'd built would keep working long after I'd moved on, creating a workplace where credentials mattered more than connections, where documentation defeated manipulation, and where the only way to succeed was to earn it. Root access granted permanently. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.